You're listening to Protecting What Matters by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
We do unfortunately see a whole lot of overloaded outlets anymore, and the danger in that is you overload an outlet, it can start sparking and arcing, and then not only do you have an electrical shock hazard, but you also have a fire hazard.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Protecting What Matters. The first week of February is National Burn Awareness Week, and this year's theme is Burn Prevention Starts Where You Live. So on this episode, we're going to focus on how you can help prevent burns and fires in your home. I'm Jared Clay, Public Information Officer for the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of State Fire Marshal, and joining me today is Fire Prevention Bureau Assistant Chief Paul Martin. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Hey Jared, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. This is going to be a theme of the whole episode today, but burn risk exists in just about every part of a living space, even a workspace, regardless if you live in a house or an apartment. And those risks can present themselves in a number of ways, but by being proactive and taking some simple steps, everybody can help prevent burns and keep their family, their homes, all of that safe. So when someone thinks burns in the home, their first thought is probably in the kitchen or cooking, and for good reason.
Right.
That's probably the most common area that burns could take place in a home, right?
Yes, sir.
So what are some hazards in the kitchen that could lead to burns and ultimately fires, and what are some things people can do to prevent those?
So the number one cause of fires in the state of Ohio is generally, kitchen and cooking fires. So cooking plays a big role in those burns that we do see when we have these fires. And with that said, some of the things that you can do to kind of prevent those burns, when you're cooking, make sure that you always keep an eye on what you fry. So that's one of the things that we try to say, keep an eye on what you fry. That reminds you to not leave the kitchen while you're cooking. Some of the other things that you can do is, not wear loose clothing. Some people don't think about that. They're reaching across the burner and they've got, loose sweatshirt on, or a house robe or something of that nature. And the next thing you know, you've accidentally caught yourself on fire. So just some of the things you can do to help that is, if you do have loose fitting clothes or, sleeves, roll those up. Keeping those pot handles turned inward is a big thing as well, especially if you have little ones. I know that we see burns every year. It may not even be due to flame, but due to just boiling liquid on the stove. And you've got a toddler running around the house, and they're at that perfect height to just reach up and grab a hold of that. And next thing you know, you're just trying to heat up some water for some macaroni and cheese for the little one, and then you're in the hospital.
And you talked about the little ones being the perfect height and the risk of burn. I was doing some research, and according to the CDC, children under 5 are like twice as likely to go to the emergency room for burn-related injuries as anyone else. So, think about that 5-year-old range. Education's a big part of prevention.
Right.
When is a good time to start with a little one and educating them?
So at that young age, we start as early as 3 years old, 2-3 years old, with that kind of hot or not, sometimes hot. We have a program that we do that's that, and it's basically shows pictures to the young kid, and you kind of talk to them about what's hot, what's not, what's sometimes hot, which would be like a curling iron. Sometimes it's hot. Same thing with an iron. If you're going to be ironing clothes and things, it's not always hot, but it's sometimes hot. So that's a game we play with the younger ones, just trying to get them acclimated to that. And when it comes to the stove, that's a sometimes hot, but we want them to think of it as an all the time hot. So we want to keep a kid-free zone around that stove, at least 5 foot anytime you're cooking, and just let them know that, hey, this can burn you. There is a danger there.
And that's something that, for listeners who listened to earlier episodes leading up to Thanksgiving, we talked about that kind of safety circle in the kitchen. But it's also a good educational opportunity that you can show them, what's hot, what's not.
Right.
A few other things you talked about: turning handles inwards, loose fitting clothes, not being distracted, and using timers. use it. It's a
Yeah.
simple thing, but that can really help to remind you that you have something in the oven or on the stove.
It really can, Jared. And I'll be honest with you. I'm guilty of that at my own house because I just bought a new house and I have a new stove, and this new stove gets a lot hotter, a lot faster than my old one does. So I've actually burned a few things myself here recently just because I'm getting used to this new stove and this new oven and how fast it heats up versus my old one. So one of the things that we say is, keep an eye on what you fry. And then there's another little quick thing you can think of. It's called stand by your pan. It just reminds you to not leave the kitchen while you're cooking. Now, I know that, there's always going to be distractions. Someone rings the doorbell and you got to go. One of the things I would say, if someone rings the doorbell and you have to go answer it, turn your burner off while you go to the door to check that. That would be the best option for that.
And you brought up a great point, because you can take all these safety precautions, but sometimes when you're cooking, things happen and a fire can start and can result in burns or the fire spreading. Can you talk a little bit about what someone should do if they are cooking and a fire starts? Because not every fire is the same, depending on what it is, whether it's on the stovetop, in the oven. So what can folks do if that happens in their kitchen?
So if you have a fire that starts on your stovetop, for example, one of the best things you can do is have a lid to that pot or pan, whatever you're using that you're cooking in at that time, close by. The best thing to do would be to put an oven mitt on, grab that lid, and you want to think of it kind of like your Captain America, if you will. You got that shield, right? That lid is your shield, and you're going to slowly slide that over to the lid and then slide it on top of it. We don't want to go banging it onto it. You don't want to, everybody thinks fire. I've got to hurry up. I've got to go fast. At that point, slower is better, because last thing you want to do is knock that over. And now you have a fire that was controlled, it was in that pan, and now it's all over the top of your stove top. So you want to slide that pot lid over top of it and then reach back, turn the heat off to that stove and let it cool. Now, everybody that thinks about that, they want to then open that lid up to, did I get the fire out? You want to leave it on until it's cool to touch, because if you open that up and it's not fully cooled down and you reintroduce oxygen to that, it could flash back up in your face. So we want to leave that until the pot is cool to touch.
And what if something is in the oven itself?
So if you have a fire in the oven, ovens are designed to hold a tremendous amount of heat anyway. So you want to leave that shut, because if you open it, you're introducing fresh oxygen to that fire. If you leave it shut, you're actually going to help snuff that fire out. Same thing, you want to leave it shut and you want to turn that heat off to that unit. Now, if you have a fire in your oven, you still want to call the fire department to come in to make sure that it didn't recede, into the wall behind it or the cabinets around it, anything like that. Just because they're designed to hold a tremendous amount of heat doesn't mean they're designed to hold fire in. So it will contain it if you allow it to, but it's always a good idea to call the fire department, have them come in and check with their thermal imaging camera to make sure that didn't spread to the wall or cabinets.
And for a lot of people, probably first reaction or first instinct is throw water on a fire. Not always the best idea in the kitchen, right? In
the kitchen, that is usually one of the worst ideas, especially if you have any kind of grease that you're cooking with, because that will then flash out of that pan, and then next thing you know, your cabinets and everything above it is now on fire. You could also end up inadvertently burning yourself if you throw water into that, because it reacts very violently with that oil or grease.
And talking about putting out these fires, in the case that there is one, especially in the kitchen, talk a little bit about fire extinguishers. I know a lot of people hopefully have them, like maybe under their sink or somewhere in their kitchen.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, probably most of the time, people have never used one before, and when it comes time to use it, it's time to panic. So what tips can you give them? Hopefully this never happens, but if they need to use one, what they can do to properly and effectively use it.
So we generally say you want to have one in the kitchen. I generally tell people not to have it too close to the stove, because if you're going to use it in the kitchen, it's probably going to be on the stove. So you don't want to have it so close to the stove that you're actually having to get, by the fire to grab the fire extinguisher. So a little ways away from the stove is a good idea. But when you're using a fire extinguisher, we want to remember the acronym PASS. So PASS stands for pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep. Now you're going to pull the pin, that's your number one. You're going to aim at the base of the fire. You're going to squeeze the trigger or the handle, depending on which kind you have. And then you're going to sweep nice and steady back and forth. Same thing with the lid going over. The slower you go, the better it works. So if you think of a fire extinguisher kind of like you're painting a picture, you want to put a nice thick coat of that dry chemical on that fire. So the slower you go, the better it actually works. You know, people always think fire, I got to go fast. It actually works better if you go slow.
And one last thing before we leave the kitchen, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention this, especially given the recent weather in Ohio. It's been incredibly cold, record-setting cold. And during cold snaps like that, really throughout the winter, people look to alternative heating sources. And unfortunately, sometimes people choose to use their oven, leave it open to try to heat their kitchen or their house.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about why that's never a good idea and some of the consequences that could come with that?
Right. So you're 100% right. That's never a good idea. And the reason being is your stove, the oven, the stovetop, the coils, the gas, whatever it is that you heat with, it gets hot enough to reach, an internal combustion. So it reaches the ignition temperature, I guess is what I was trying to say. So it'll reach the ignition temperature in the room a lot faster. So let's say if you've got your stovetop on, for instance, and you've got cupboards above it, but you've got no pots or pans or anything on there, it's that radiant heat is going right up to those cabinets, which could then cause a fire there as well. If you have that oven door open, the same thing, those ovens are rated to go up to 500 degrees. Flash point for most fires is under that. So you're looking at, potential for causing a house fire just trying to heat your house. So we want to steer away from using that. It is meant for such a much higher heat level that there's no way to back that off. So regular heater, you've got temperature adjustments, you've got, tip over hazards and all that kind of stuff. Your oven doesn't have that, and it will not kick off just because it feels like it's getting too hot.
Absolutely. Well, stay tuned, because right after a quick break, we're going to talk about how you can stay fire safe and prevent burns in other parts of your home outside of the kitchen.
Are you looking to buy or sell a property in Ohio? Make sure to enlist the help of a trusted Ohio realtor. With a dedicated team of experienced professionals, we are here to guide you through every step of the process. Whether you're a first-time homebuyer or an experienced investor, we have the expertise to help you find the perfect property for your real estate needs. Ohio Realtors adhere to strict ethical standards, ensuring that your interests are protected and your
Thank you for
transactions are
listening to
handled
Protecting What Matters.
professionally.
I'm Jared Clay, Public Information Officer for the Division of
Contact
State
us
Fire
today at
Marshal. I'm speaking with Fire
ohiorealtors.org and
Bureau
let us
Assistant
help
Chief
make
Paul
your
Martin
move a
about
smart
how you can
one.
reduce burn
Ohio
and fire
Realtors
risk
will
in
get
your
you
home.
there.
Paul, we've talked about the burn and fire risk in the kitchen, but there are risks throughout the home as well. It is 2025. Homes are full of electronics, and that means electrical cords, extension cords, power strips, you name it.
That's right.
And those can bring some risk as well. So what are some things people can do to prevent, burns or even shocks or overloading circuits?
Yeah. So the number one thing is that extension cords, they are meant for temporary use. They're not meant for an all the time use. So, when we're plugging in these devices, when we're plugging in heaters, when we're plugging anything, we want to make sure that we're plugging those directly into the outlet and using extension cords only for temporary. If you're not in the room with an extension cord, you should probably be unplugging it due to the fact that they can actually pull more power out of the wall outlet than the device that you're using actually needs. So let's say if you have one of those small little brown extension cords and you plug something in like a heater or something that pulls a lot of electricity, it's pulling more power than that cord can handle, so it can overheat that smaller cord and end up causing a fire. The other is true as well. So say if you have a large diameter extension cord plugged into the wall, it's now inputting more power into whatever unit that you plug into it than it needs, and it can overheat that smaller cord that you're plugging into it and then cause a fire there as well. So, extension cords come in all kind of different diameters. They're going to pull different levels of electricity out, which is then going to cause more heat. So definitely not a good idea to use those if you're not in the room with them.
And that's the extension cords and overloading outlets. That's something we talked a lot about heading into the holidays. You think about lights and trees and decorations, but that's something to keep in mind year round because,
Absolutely.
like we said, electronics are everywhere.
Well, we've moved into the 2025 era where everybody has a need for more plugins, right? And some of these homes are much older where they only had one or two plugins in a room. So we do unfortunately see a whole lot of overloaded outlets anymore. And the danger in that is you overload an outlet, it can start sparking and arcing. And then not only do you have an electrical shock hazard, but you also have a fire hazard.
Yep. And we mentioned a little bit about heating safety in our first segment. We're talking about burns and fire prevention in your home, but given the time of the year and the weather that we've seen throughout most of Ohio for much of the winter so far, this is a good time to remind people about the burn and fire risk that come with using space heaters. They can be very useful, but they can have the risk. Can you talk about a little bit what those risks are and how people can mitigate those?
Yeah, unfortunately, we do see a lot of fires around cold snaps like we just had because of alternative heating sources and utilizing space heaters and things like that. Really what we want to focus in on if we're using one of those is that it is a vetted heater that has got a UL listing, something that has been tested by a third party. We like to see if it has some kind of a tip over turn off. We want to use those on a flat, hard surface as well, somewhere where it can't be knocked over easily. And if it does, hopefully that anti-tip, kicks in and shuts it off. There's also a 3-foot circumference that you want to have around that heater at all times. And when I say circumference, I mean completely around it, not 3 feet from the front of it, because that's where the heat's coming out, but also 3 feet from the back and the sides. You want to keep that 3 feet circumference away from anything that could possibly burn.
And 3 feet, another good reminder, a lot of people may want to use a fireplace.
Yep.
Same thing there, right?
Absolutely.
Because those present their own risk when you talk about a fireplace.
Yeah.
Kind of with that, one thing that when I was planning this that came to mind are candles. A lot of people, myself included, we like to have candles, whether in your kitchen, living room, wherever, and they seem innocent enough, but at the end of the day, it is an open flame.
It is.
And there are some risks with candles as well, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We see a lot of fires started by candles as well. And best practice with a candle, if you want to use a candle, use it while you're in the room. But if you're going to leave the room for any reason, for any amount of time, you want to blow that candle out.
So we've talked about the kitchen, more of living areas here. But as we mentioned, there are burn and fire risks throughout the home. One we talked about a little bit off air was the laundry room and dryers especially. Can you talk a little bit about those risks?
Yeah. So dryer fires are actually the number 2 cause of fires in the state of Ohio is generally dryer fires. And we can mitigate that very easily just by making sure that we are cleaning those lint traps, after each use. So every time you use it, you want to make sure you're cleaning that lint trap out. We also want to do a little bit of preventative maintenance with those, and you're actually supposed to take the backs off those once a year, kind of vacuum that area out. And a lot of people don't know that. The other thing that I always like to tell people when it comes to dryers, dryer fires, is not keeping your bleach and not keeping your laundry detergent and all that kind of stuff right by the dryer. Because if the dryer catches on fire, let's say most people will store that in the cabinet above the dryer, the next thing that's going to catch on fire is going to be that cabinet up there. When that soap, that detergent, that bleach especially, when it starts to boil, it starts to off gas, it brings out some very volatile chemicals that, just a few breaths of that can render you unconscious.
That's probably one that a lot of people don't really think about, the dryer. Yeah. You talked about taking the back off and sweeping that off. I jotted down a note because I've never done that in mine. So that's a great reminder for everyone listening. When you talk about things like that people may not think about that could present a burn or a fire risk in the home, are there any others that we haven't touched on? I think of TV shows and movies when, did I unplug the curling iron? Or did I unplug the straightener? Right. Things like that. Are there any of those that people may not think of right away?
Yeah, so there are a lot of what we call common home fire safety dangers, and you've already hit on most of them with the candles and the heaters, the cooking and all that. Those are generally common fire safety dangers. Curling iron is another one that we've seen that have started a lot of fires over the years. But when we're in that realm of common home fire safety dangers, it really comes down to just common sense and making sure that you're doing your due diligence to turn things off when they're not in use. We've also seen, a little bit of an increase in fires due to charging cords for, cell phones, tablets, things like that. And that generally comes down to them being covered up with something, either under the blanket because you've got it on the bed, or under a pillow where it can overheat. So making sure that we're not covering those cords up to those, those devices that all of us seem to have, especially right there by our beds. I'm guilty of it myself. I've got my cell phone charger right there, and a lot of times it lays on the bed, but I try to keep it uncovered and off to the edge, and then I'll put it on my nightstand whenever I'm going to sleep at night. So just make sure you're not sleeping with that in the bed with you to where it could accidentally get covered up and overheat.
I think that's one a lot of people can relate to. But
yeah.
We're going to take one more quick break, but stay tuned, because when we return, we're going to talk about some things you can do and have in your home that can prove to be life-saving for you and your family.
It's your money, come and claim it. The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Unclaimed Funds is safeguarding nearly $4 billion in unclaimed funds.
Thanks for listening.
So there's a good
Protecting What
chance
Matters.
you
I'm
or someone
Jared
you know
Clay,
has
and I'm
money
joined by
waiting to be
Fire Prevention
claimed.
Assistant Chief
Just head over to our
Paul
website,
Martin.
unclaimedfunds.ohio.gov, to search for your name, the name of a family member, or a loved one to see if
We've
you
talked
have an
about many
unclaimed
different
fund.
burn and fire risks that are present in homes and what Ohioans can do to minimize the risk, and we encourage everyone to take those proactive steps. But there are a few things people can have in their homes and things that they can do that can prove to be lifesavers in the event of a fire. First off, Paul, we can't talk about them enough, but smoke alarms. Talk a little bit about the importance of having properly working smoke alarms at homes.
Yeah. So if you have properly working smoke alarms in your home, you are twice as likely to survive a fire. So should you have a home fire and you've got, properly working smoke alarms, those are going to wake you up. And in the state of Ohio, most fatal fires happen between 11 at night and 7 in the morning, Jared, because we're all asleep.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have properly working smoke alarms, they're going to wake you up, alert you to that fire, and buy you that valuable time to be able to get out of your home.
And, we talk about it all the time, testing, making sure the batteries are changed if they don't have the sealed batteries in them.
Right.
But something that people may not think about, how many should a home have and where should they be?
So you're right about testing. We want to test those every month, right? And then we want to, if applicable, we want to change those batteries twice a year if they're the ones that don't have the sealed lithium-ion batteries. So, where should they be? You want to have one in every sleeping area. So that could be a bedroom, but it can also be a living room or a den or whatever. Wherever someone is sleeping, we want to have a good working smoke alarm. We also want to have one on every level. And when I say level, that means the basement as well. If you have a basement, you want to have one in the basement. You want to have one on the first floor. If you have a second story, you want to have at least one up there. So I always tell people one on every level, one in every bedroom or sleeping area, and then one in the hallway outside of your bedrooms. So those are invaluable. Right now, you've got less than 3 minutes to get out of a house fire because all of the petroleum-based products and most of the cushions on our couches are spun fiberglass and things like that. So they burn hotter, they burn faster. So we've got less time to get out of that fire. They put off a lot of toxic chemicals. So having that good working smoke alarm to wake you up and buy you that 2 to 3 minutes to get out safely is invaluable to your survival in that situation.
And you talk about having that extra time. It sounds obvious, but when the smoke alarms sound, families need to get out of the home, which brings me to escape plans for
Right.
families. What should that look like for families, and how should those come to be, or how can they develop those?
So they're all going to be different, right? So because every house is different. My house doesn't look the same as yours, right? Yours doesn't look the same as mine or anyone else's. So there's a big difference in there, especially with the people that live in our house. We have to consider them in our fire escape plan. If you've got small children that maybe can't help themselves out, you've got to include that in your plan to be able to help them get out as well. Same goes for if you have anyone who is an older Ohioan that maybe needs a little bit of assistance getting out, or maybe they use a mobility device or something. So everyone's escape plan is going to look a little bit different. But one thing that's going to remain the same is we want to make sure that every room where someone is sleeping, you have at least 2 ways out of that room. Now, your 2 ways are going to be, your doorway is obviously your preferred route, and we want to go to that door. If we feel that door and it's hot, or there's any kind of smoke coming through that door, then we realize we need to go out of our secondary exit, which is going to be a window. So having a 2 ways out, knowing what those 2 ways out, and having a safe way to get out of that secondary exit. So if it's a window, if you're on the second story, obviously you got to make sure that you have a safe way to get out of that house. So let's walk through it for a second. What's your house look like, Jared?
I live in a small apartment, but
Small apartment.
Obviously, my door. I have 2 doors and then a window in my bedroom.
Okay. So first floor, second floor?
Second floor.
Second floor?
Yep.
All right. So if you had to go out that window, do you have a safe way to go out that window?
There is a tree that's like
There
right
is a
outside that I could. But yeah, no, it'd just be a hop down for
All
2
right.
floors. Yeah.
All right. So we have that happen quite a bit every year, and there's a lot of very bad injuries because of that. People having to essentially jump out of their second story. So something I would suggest that you get is a window ladder, and you can pick those up at Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever, and they're not very expensive. You can get them on Amazon even. I've looked at them. I've got 2 for my kids' bedroom because they have second story bedrooms as well. And the ones that I bought them were a little more expensive, but you can generally get them for about $60.
No, I think that's a great point, because I think people hear 2 ways out. Okay, I've got the way out, but then
Yeah.
it doesn't go beyond that.
Right.
And then you talk about the escape plans. It's great to have one, but it's even more important to review them and practice them, right? It's
Yeah.
just like in sports, you got to review the game plan and practice it, so when it comes time for action, you don't have to sit there and think about it. You can just react.
Exactly. I like the way you said that you have to be able to react. So practice
Yeah.
is where that comes into play. When you're in an emergency situation, really you will default back to your training, whatever you train to do, right? So as firefighters, we train to fight that fire. We go into autopilot all the times when we're there. We know what has to be done and how to do it. So if you've not practiced your home escape plan, it's going to be a little harder for you to implement. And we want to practice it because we want to know what everyone else in our family is going to do in that event as well. So the last part of that is, escape plan, you want to have a safe meeting place. Now, that's somewhere outside the home that everyone knows about, that's within a safe distance from the house to where, if the fire gets out of control, you're still far enough away, but also close enough that everyone from the family can meet there. That way everyone knows that everyone got out safely.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. I think we've provided a lot of great tips and advice for people who not only have went burns, but even worse, what if the fire, how to prevent those, and in the event of them, maybe put them out or get out of the home. So I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah.
You've given us a lot of great information. But as we wrap up this edition of Protecting What Matters, we encourage everyone listening to follow all of these safety tips we've talked about today. They can help keep you, your family, and your home safe. To learn more about the State Fire Marshal and its Fire Prevention Bureau and more on prevention and education, just visit our website, com.ohio.gov/fire, and you can just click Fire Prevention on the left side of the screen. And as always, remember to check those smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. They could save your life. Thank you for listening, and stay fire safe, Ohio.